It's great to see everyone here today. For those who don't know me, I'm Eve Kerr. I'm director of the VA Center for Clinical and Management Research. And on behalf of our center and on behalf of IHPI, we're very excited to welcome you here today for our third annual now point-counterpoint debate. And today we're particularly excited to have two of our own IHPI members debate the topic, should researchers be involved in business ventures? And I just want to take a few minutes to introduce both of them. So Dr. Strecher, Vic Strecher, who will be debating on the pro side of this position, received his Ph.D. at the University of Michigan, has been here in one form or another since the 80s. And since 1995, Dr. Strecher has also been a professor in the University of Michigan School of Public Health. And he also founded the U of M Center for Health Communications Research. That's the center that Larry runs now, right here in NCRC. That's a collaborative, research-focused organization of scientists, software engineers, and artists. And through the center, Dr. Strecher has been a leading investigator in grant-funded studies on health-related behavior change. In 1998, Dr. Strecher founded Health Media Incorporated, which is an Ann Arbor-based company that has now grown to over 185 employees, developing and disseminating award-winning tailored health interventions for health promotion, disease prevention, and behavioral health. And that company was acquired in 2008 by Johnson & Johnson as their initial investment in the area of wellness and prevention. Dr. Hayward, Dr. Rod Hayward, who many of you know well, is a professor in the medical school and in the School of Public Health. He's the rector of the Robert Wood Johnson VA Clinical Scholars Program. He's a senior investigator at CCMR and the former director of CCMR. And his research, which has been funded by AHRQ, NIH, VA, PCORI, and multiple foundations, focuses on ways to personalize healthcare delivery to make care more effective, affordable, and consistent with patients' preferences. He's mentored dozens of fellows and junior faculty, including myself, and he's helped them to launch successful academic careers. So today they're coming together in a friendly debate. You guys can determine how friendly it is, in fact. To really debate this very important topic, should researchers be involved in business ventures? And as I mentioned, Dr. Strecher will argue that in some way, shape, or form, business ventures will save science, right? Maybe. And Dr. Hayward will argue in some shape or form that the inevitable conflict of interest will destroy science. So, okay, these are the extreme positions. I've asked them to take extreme positions, so to exemplify the points herein. Of course, we'll find maybe that the answer lies somewhere in between these extreme positions, but that is something that you will determine. So here's our format for the point-counterpoint today. First, we'll have each of our debaters make an opening statement, about 8 minutes each. Dr. Strecher with the pro, Dr. Hayward with the con position. At the end of that, we'll have answer questions posed and a rebuttal to each of the presenters. And then we'll have time for questions from the audience. So please be thinking about those questions as you hear the debaters present. And finally, each of the debaters will have a closing statement. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Hayward and Dr. Strecher.
Should I just go ahead? All right, good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I've not been in a debate like this, so I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about bias. This is an article that's a review about pharmaceutical industry sponsorship and research, and what it basically finds is that pharmaceutical industry-sponsored drug trials are roughly 4 times more likely to have positive results. There is bias. So there's no denial of that. It makes perfect sense, and it would be silly for me to argue that there is not bias, and in particular, there is economic bias. What I would like to say, though, is we are all biased. We're biased in so many different things. Many of you are associated with one of our state's oldest and largest business ventures, and that's called the University of Michigan Medical Center. That actually is associated with the University of Michigan, but of course it's a gigantic profit-making enterprise. It is a, quote, not-for-profit, but it makes enormous profit. Let's not kid ourselves. And many of us are associated with that. Many of us are associated with this field called medicine or public health. The very profession that we're in has its own associated biases based on how we're trained and how we view the world. This is an example of how there's time spent in preventive health services, and even if we are interested in preventive health services, one thing that clinicians tend to focus on are these things that relate to procedures that actually make money, such as pap smears, PSA testing, mammography, cholesterol, blood pressure. Look at the end, at how many minutes of time are spent on what is arguably by far the most important things to really focus on if you truly care about the well-being and health of your patient, which would be exercise, tobacco, and nutrition. So on average, I believe this is a Robert Wood Johnson study, the average physician gets 1/2 an hour of training in behavioral counseling in 4 years of medical school. Now, if we went up 30,000 feet and just looked down and said, how could we help people develop greater well-being and wellness and health in this field? I think we actually may start becoming behavioral scientists, to be honest, and start focusing on these things a little bit more. But I think the profession of medicine is somewhat biased in and of itself. If we want to take a 30,000-foot level approach to this, we may want to become community organizers and actually change the environment, change communities. We may actually want to become, God forbid, politicians and change policies. And then finally, and interestingly enough, having been to many developing countries around the world, as I'm sure Rod has many times, the one thing you notice when you walk through Lusaka, Zambia, is that there are just no businesses. And one of the things that truly improves health is economic development, and one of the things that truly improves economic development is business. So should we always be shying away from business? Is business always bad necessarily? I would argue not. My own feeling about this is one that I need to make impact. This is a slide I created 20 years ago about myself. And it was really something that I created over a weekend, and I had not intended to show it to anybody, but I started thinking about myself, and I just decided to put my own headstone up, and I wrote it down on paper first and said, well, what would be on my headstone, this is 20 years ago, if I continued on my path of salami science, of least publishable units, of getting grants all the time, publish, always doing that. And then I remember we offered all of our work at our Center for Health Communication Research to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. My colleagues, by the way, in the Cancer Center, if they were building a new drug and it was powdery and, maybe disgusting or whatever, well, maybe there could be 4 or 5 drug companies that were waiting in the hallway to grab that disgusting powdery substance if there was a randomized clinical trial that was positive and put in $250 million to turn that disgusting powdery substance into a little purple pill. $250 million on average. There was no industry like that in what I was doing, except for the Centers for Disease Control. That was kind of our arm of public health. So we offered all of our work to the Centers for Disease Control in 1997. You know what they said? People won't use the internet for their health. They specifically did say that to us. They said, why are you bothering with all this? This is like a science fair project. And it was really depressing, I must say. And that's when I wrote this slide up. I thought, I'll have my frequent flyer number, miles, I'll have my journal articles, but that's it. What will I have to show for myself? What kind of impact will I have really made other than having made a nice living for myself and hopefully facilitated a nice living for other people in my research laboratory? I think so much more could be done. And so one day a person came in, he had been the past president of Gateway Computers, his name was Rick Snyder, and he came in and he had just built a $100 million venture capital firm in Ann Arbor, and he was looking at hybrids between technology and healthcare. He's very interested in labs like ours, and a 1-hour meeting turned into a 4-hour meeting with Rick. And the first thing he said to me after we finished this discussion of what could be, he said, this should be an industry. I said, I know! There is no industry, though. You doctors have industry. We don't have that. You have your medical center. We don't have that. We don't have an industry per se, other than people in gray cinder block walls who don't see the future, who are cheap and technophobic. And I thought the only way, and I'm sorry, but it's true. And nicely enough, the CDC invited me last year to give a keynote to 2,000 people to all about health communications, and it was totally different, so that's nice. But if you really want to go out and do something new and innovative, I realized the only way to do that was to build a new business. And as a result, what we did was build Health Media. Health Media has now reached 50 million people around this country with behavior change programs. It raised the bar. What we had before was WebMD and other companies that put pamphlets of the world online, which have been shown for 60 years to not change behavior. But all they did was put pamphlets online with a better search engine. We said we can tailor health communications. We know because we've proven it in our Center for Health Communications many, many times over in many different situations, and they continue to do amazing work doing that, but they needed an industry. And suddenly when we created Health Media, everybody around the industry, including WebMD, said, well, we tailor too, really. So we raised the bar. And I'm not just being self-congratulatory about this at all. It takes people, though, who are entrepreneurs, who see something bigger than themselves to go ahead and set things like this up. So just as an example, this is what Health Media created. We created a new way of collecting information using HRA, using a conversation. We have multiple programs that are all connected with one another. We have a knowledge base that has millions and millions of people. We connect it with an EMR. Nobody was doing that until we started doing that. Now there are other companies doing that, and I say hooray. That's wonderful. It's exactly what we wanted to do. Money was certainly not the big outcome for me in this. It was the least important part of this. And in fact, I'll say this and then stop. The entrepreneurs that I know who have been successful cared less about money. What they really cared about is changing the world. And that's what I think we're doing. Thank you.
Right in order. First, a disclosure, I am cheap and technophobic. It sounds like Vic thought this is what I was going to talk about, that business is bad, right? Because most of this argument is, oh, business is good, business is important, entrepreneur. And that's not me. I'm not the one who's worried about business. I'm very pro-business. I think business is important. Not one of those left-wingers who are always saying, oh, we're in the public interest, that somehow academic research is pure and good and business is bad. I strongly believe that the empirical evidence that I've seen is well-functioning markets are the best way to provide goods and services to the sector. Right? Now, yes, the left will point out markets often have failures, and those can be quite substantial. But it's government's role to fix market failure, not businesses. That is on us when businesses can profit within the law by giving us things that aren't good. And we shouldn't blame businesses for that. We are forcing almost businesses to survive in a market that is not functional. But academic researchers have a global public responsibility. And that global responsibility is not to not have business benefit from what we do. I've done a lot of pro bono consultation with businesses. In fact, I will rarely say no if I think I can help a business. But I am not invested in that interest. I'm not involved in that interest. I will do the same thing for a labor union. I will do the same thing for any organization, consumer groups or whatever, because that is my job as an academic researcher, right? Both are important, both are essential, and they can't be done at the same time, I would argue. I'd also argue researchers are free. I'm not going to argue that doing research for 15 years and deciding you want to start a business isn't something people should feel free for. Quit your academic job, suggest that you're no longer an academic researcher, that's part of what you bring to this, and you become a business entrepreneur. That could be a great thing. I think more researchers should probably do that. They reach a point where they really want to be doing something else. They can go into politics. I think more researchers should. We have never, ever had a president who knows much of anything about science, right? That'd be great. Rather than a lot of doctors who go into Congress and politics who also know nothing about science. Okay? So those are all good things, right? But science has many inherent interests. I'm also not going to argue with that, right? We have a lot of interests. We have our individual economic self-interest. We have the guild economic and tribal interests. These are said, doctors have that inherent self-interest, that they are a doctor in that. Scientists have an inherent self-interest to promote science being good, right? We have inherent self-interest, individual professional self-interest, right? This is the idea, if I decide that I'm the one that shows that a certain type of approach is good, and I become famous for that, I am really, really resistant to ever finding out my key discovery for which I got famous is wrong. These are inherent. Cognitive biases are unavoidable. But the researcher's job is to guard against these inherent researches to the best they can. That is what they should be focused on. I should divorce myself from the University of Michigan's economic interest to the best I can. I might not be able to do that perfectly, but that is my primary job. And the fact that there are unavoidable risks is not an open license for reckless behavior. Bit of historical evidence here. The Lord's Prayer goes, lead me away from temptation. It does not say, bring on the temptation, baby, because I can handle it. So part 2 of business ethics is that this is more than just another bias. That you have a moral responsibility to pursue the investor's interests, not your own. That is the ethics. When you have investors, when you have an organization, you are responsible to the units of that organization. If you do not do that, you are violating your fiduciary and moral responsibility. You have a responsibility to follow the law, but usually this interest almost always involves enlarging profits to the extent you can do it within the laws. That is your responsibility. If the market is failing, and that requires legal deceits of the public, you are morally obligated to do that. It's somebody else's job to fix the market, because you are going to be losing those people's money. It's not because you're doing it to make money. You're doing it because you have taken on that responsibility, right? I deal with this all the time as being a patient advocate. To the degree I can get something covered for the patient, even if it's a loophole in the insurance, I'm the patient's advocate. I'm not the insurer's advocate. And trying to be the public's advocate, right? One other point, yes, some businesses state that they have a social mission, right? It almost never works out. It's hard to balance those two things, your social mission and viability in the marketplace. Google's a good example. After losing lots of money on social ventures for 3 years, they became like any other company. Not bad, I love Google. I think they're a good company with a good business model, but they behave like other companies, and the bottom line is what they follow. And that is almost the history of every for-profit venture you're going to find, whether it's the hospital industry or, in fact, most philanthropies start behaving more like businesses than somebody who's trying to do something in the public interest. So the problem isn't a risk of conflicts. It's not a risk. It is inherent. You have an ethical responsibility to put the interest of the public far behind the interest of your investors. Or to reverse that, and you're betraying someone. You can't straddle. I'm not arguing that both aren't good. You can't straddle both and remain ethical agent. Also, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, researchers are human beings, right? Now, you can't really prove the null, and I must admit, every once in a while I have struggled to find empirical evidence that this researcher has any humanity. But so far I haven't been able to reject the null. We're frail beings. We don't do well with temptation. This is US history. You know, almost every good freedom fighter becomes a dictator. If they succeed in freedom, then they become the oppressor. That intellectual energy is scarce. One person that a colleague I respect, when he started his venture, admitted to me that 90% of his intellectual energy went into his company. So what is the university getting? That's the investor. And the responsibility to the public is ephemeral. You know, we sort of think of these other things, anything else that distracts us, that our responsibility, our moral responsibility is to the public, draws us away for something that is hard to always remind ourselves of. So business and research, academic research, are both good things, but you can only do one at a time. Oh, you got rid of my last one? Oh, well. It's a great quote. Adam Smith and everything.
Wow, capitalist.
Yeah, no? Yeah. And basically it says that the interests of any merchant is always, to some degrees, against that of the public, and often opposite of that of the public.
Adam Smith, a great capitalist.
Yes.
And Stalin actually said, when the capitalists come here to Russia, they'll drown all of you like blind kittens. I
quoted the capitalist.
I feel like to some extent academics are blind kittens. I think that they have this worldview that, and I understand what you said, that business is not bad. You're happy with business and you can work pro bono in that area. But I guess I would question a couple of your assumptions. One of the assumptions is that businesses only have a fiduciary responsibility to their investors. They certainly do have a fiduciary responsibility to their investors, but having had a business and having seen many other businesses, I also know that the businesses that have a purpose that goes greater, that is actually greater than revenue. And I know you're somewhat, I'll say that Jefferson discuss the cynical versus skeptical. I'll put you in the skeptical, but I think you're bordering on cynical on that. I'll put it this way. Raj Sisodia, a business school professor, developed this list of companies called the firms of endearment. He picked out 28 companies. Some of those companies include REI, Whole Foods. I can go on and on. There are many other ones, UPS. And these companies were picked first and foremost by their purpose, their revenue transcending purpose. And I know you say, well, these companies start out and then 3 years later they don't have their purpose anymore. I think that's absolutely false, Rod. These companies actually maintained their purpose, and they followed them starting in 1998, and then took a look at what their return on investment was in 2013, and they compared them against the S&P 500, and they compared those against good to great companies, if you're familiar with good to great companies. So these good to great companies include Philip Morris, include many others. They are selected by their financial prowess. After 15 years, the S&P 500 returned 118% on the investment. Good to great companies returned 251% on the investment. Firms of endearment, which were known not selected for their financial performance initially, but selected for their revenue transcending purpose, had a 1,700% return on investment 15 years later. I think the modern entrepreneur understands that a real revenue transcending purpose will allow you to sustain better. And the reason for profit, for revenue, is to be able to sustain and grow a business, and that's essential. Now, in terms of being able to work with a business, I think it's, the key here, and you really nicely mentioned all the different types of bias, and I completely agree with you. All of those biases are relevant, including a history professor who creates a book. That's a business venture. Let's not pretend that a history professor just creating a good book that happens to get on the New York Times bestseller list is not a business person. They certainly are, and they're certainly biased. But what's key is that people disclose their biases. You said people need to understand their biases. Absolutely, they do. And that's the job of an academic researcher. I couldn't agree more with you. But what I maybe differ with you about is that these things need to be disclosed on a regular basis, and people need to understand what the real biases that they have are. And I'm not sure that most academics really do understand biases beyond the simple financial bias, which to me is just only one bias and a fairly crude bias.
That as a logician, I would notice that none of those arguments apply to my key argument. It's the idea that there are biases, that yes, no one's perfect. Yes, companies can have a very strong interest in making it seem like they transform, that they go beyond revenues, right? That's in their economic interest often, to make them seem like that while they're raking in as much money as anyone else, right? It's sort of like, use Viagra, and look, we're helping you get the attractive woman that's about 40 years younger than you, right? Because we care about your sexual happiness, right? Part of business is making people think that you care about something as profits as you make those profits. If you're not making profits, you go away in business. And part of that is, now in a highly transparent market, you can do both. If the public cares enough about it, and evidence has shown that they don't, a small segment, right? But it doesn't get rid of your conflict. You have a conflict to make it seem like you transcend revenue more. And it's not all revenue. I'm very clear that, as I mentioned, tribal and professional. Much of the interest is the pride people take in that business, how important it makes them feel, right? And if that business fails, that sense of failure is going to be bigger. But the difference is, you are now married to that business. How much you care about that business, it doesn't matter whether you care so much for the finances or care so much about what's on your tombstone. You care about something deeply that is not what your academic research job is. You have provoked something. Yes, these inherent businesses. I'm not here to defend researchers. I attack researchers all the time. I think they're not dedicated enough to this. And the last thing I want to see is researchers having another way to avoid that public interest. I said it was ephemeral. I think researchers need to redouble down on they have exclusive interest in the public. My bet here is this room is not 50-50 Democrat and Republican, right? And I know a lot of academic researchers are guilty of what the right accuses us of. We bring our partisan biases, our own personal views, to how we present our research. We reject things that suggest, in this instance, there isn't a bias against a certain group. Well, we're not interested in that. We increase our importance by there are being one. So I agree, Vic. That is not an excuse to bring on even more. That energy should be devoted to keeping researchers devoted to that. And the basic thing is, I am not saying researchers should not even more frequently go out into business and be entrepreneurs. I am saying you can't do both at the same time. And the fact that money isn't the only thing is not the point. Your pride is in there as well. The pride is probably the biggest thing. And I agree, most business people are motivated much more for money, much more than money. Because they're still out there making businesses, trying to get everything going long after everyone wonders why they didn't just buy an island and go out and retire and live a hedonistic existence. It's often because these people are already living a hedonistic existence in a good way. They're putting their mind to businesses and making them successful. I have no problems with that. My problem is researchers need to be researchers, And business people need to be business people. You can't straddle that. And I'm also against all the docs that take money from pharmaceutical companies. It's the same thing. I agree with Vic. It's the same thing. When I have colleagues that make $100,000, $120,000 a year from their vested business, they're involved in business. They can pretend they're not just because they gave a talk for $10,000, being flown first class, to China or to some resort where business people are gathering in Hawaii. It's the same thing. So I'm not just singling out investment. This is a big problem. We don't need to make it bigger.
Okay. I think we're ready for questions. I'm going to pose the first one. Rod, Epic comes to you, and they say, you've been working on this risk score, cardiovascular disease, personalizing it. We see the potential there to really improve the way we deliver care for patients with cardiovascular risk, and it's going to save money, but it's going to be better for patients, and it's going to save lots of heart attacks, and that's a great thing. So we're going to incorporate that into an Epic module. And people all over the country, if they want to, they can buy this Epic module for Epic, and it's going to help patients everywhere. And what we'll do is, we know you don't want to take any money yourself, so every module that's bought, we'll take 1% and we'll put it in a research account for you at the university. Good or bad? Anyway, let both of you answer.
Yeah, that this sort of thing has actually happened on many occasions, and my view is I will consult for any company, given the other time I have for producing new knowledge and innovation, which is my main job. I will not take money for that. I would take travel expenses if they needed me to go there, but not an honorarium. And I would make sure that there is under no circumstances any way that I can't do this for Cerna, that I can't do this for some homemade approach. The public owns me. I am a steward for this public information. And I have every right to do other things with my life, right? I have those rights, but I don't have the right to take public funds, philanthropic funds, and then use that outside of what is my main job. And that can be disclosed, but, and I do make a good living and all doing this, but that was my deal. This is making my university salary, which is public, to serve the public. And of course, I like my research doing well, and I have a bias when I show something, but I work really hard. I want to always be the first one to find that I'm wrong or to admit it right away. And I have I want no obligations that would keep me from doing that.
So you wouldn't take any money from Epic, you would give them the knowledge. What about you, Vic?
I'd build a new Epic. No, really. I think Epic stinks. No, really. I think that it's missed so many things, so many marks. It's frustrated so many physicians. It's frustrated many more patients than physicians. I think it was in part, well, I won't go down that road, but I think there's many things that I would want to do about Epic, and the thing I would do is just create a new Epic if I was that interested. And if I knew a lot about electronic medical records, why not?
Questions from the audience? Marianne.
So I'm really interested in where you draw.
Microphone coming
I really am interested in where you draw the line, and I think this is such an important challenge, especially as funding for research is declining from the public sector, and there are others that are willing to invest. So I know you said that you wouldn't, that physicians who take money directly from pharmaceutical manufacturers are problematic. What about physicians who take money for research from pharmaceutical manufacturers? A little similar to Eve's question, but somewhat different. And isn't part of our mission teaching? And isn't developing businesses also part of that mission as well? Isn't that part of what researchers should be helping with within a public university setting? So maybe both of you can address.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that that question. I think actually that this, Rod, you mentioned innovation, and I really think that's so important. When you consult, you're getting belly to belly with the marketplace. One of the things that I think is the biggest problem in research is that most research people do, that I see, that I'm exposed to in my own field, is irrelevant, quite honestly. It's not, and the reason it's irrelevant is that the people doing the research don't really understand what the real problems are in the world. When you consult, and I think you're implying this, whether you consult for money or not for money, I actually don't care. What I do think is when you consult, you actually learn about the pain of the marketplace. And when you're consulting, it's kind of like flying in a Piper Cub. It's great, and you can fly all over and you can pick out things. When you build a new business, it's like flying in a 747. Suddenly, you're getting into the back rooms and understanding some of the deeper issues that are fundamental and I think much bigger. You're not just getting the story from one company, you're actually getting behind the story in many companies. You're getting behind the story in larger organizations and networks of companies. You start understanding things and becoming, as a result, a better teacher and a better researcher. And I actually think you can do these two things in parallel with full disclosure.
That, as I said, I never say no to people that if I think I can help. That would not be how to run a business, because I don't think I can help somebody with the business. I can help them with the technical thing, because that's my expertise. So if somebody can you help me start a business? I'd say no. And I really mean can. I can't. But the money thing is an issue. I would have no problems with others. I draw my own line on pretty much nothing, and that has to do with an experience I had consulting with people in this very business. It paid 5% of my salary for 2 years. It was an extension, and they were making triglyceridone, which ended up killing people. But I really developed close relationships with the people here. I really respected the researchers. It wasn't Pfizer then, it was Werner Lambert. I really respected them. They were smart, they were dedicated, and the results came out in a way they didn't like. It's really hard to have people you think fans of really doing something that really hurts them and their company. And I decided I never want to be in that position again, right? And so when you take money, if there's no strings attached and it's your usual fees and it's not this extra profit that often goes with this, right? That's the danger. People are making it much easier to get the research, making much more than they would paying them 80% effort, where it's really only taking them 10%. It easily slides into that. And I know so many researchers who really are not doing research anymore. They are marketing research for companies that gradually got into this. So for me, I don't even want to start. But there is a way that if you're strong enough that you're doing the exact same sort of things, the exact same research with no strings attached that you would do for NIH, I can't say that's wrong.
Can I interject 1 second? Would you take money from NIH?
Not only would I, Vic, but I have.
How about the American Cancer Society?
No.
Okay. So you draw the line there at a voluntary because you may not agree with their policies?
That they wouldn't give me any money given my past reports on cancer screening not working. So I don't take any money from them, but there's not a lot of temptation there because they don't like my research. In fact, most advocacy groups don't like my research.
Right, and I don't want to, actually I apologize because I didn't want to make any of this personal, so I withdraw that. But I think the point, because it doesn't really matter. What matters is in the bigger picture. We take NIH money, and yet I would suggest that NIH itself, through its own policies, through its own approaches, has forced most researchers into a cattle chute of research endeavors that may not be nearly as meaningful as if they were to jump out of that cattle chute and start building something different and start approaching something different. And that was exactly the reason I created Health Media. It's exactly the reason I've created a new company called Jewel, which is focused on purpose in life. Now, who's going to fund research on purpose in life? Not a lot of people. I decided that a new company needed to be built in that because nobody else is doing it. Does it mean I need to quit my academic job in order to do that? I don't believe that's the case. I think I'm a better researcher and a much, much better teacher as a result of my experience in building these companies.
Yeah, and again, my involvement with businesses where I'm not taking anything from them, and it's very clear that I am just a public servant, have been very, very positive for all the reasons Vic says. And I'm not arguing that people reach a point, they go out into business. But the point is, you are inherently in conflict when you do that.
But we are with NIH as well. We're all inherently in conflict through the cattle chute of where we're pushed.
The unavoidable is not an excuse for avoiding things. We all have things that happen. That doesn't accuse us for doing things that we do have a choice about, right? And that energy should be used to renew your dedication. So the fact that something's bad is not an excuse to say we should do something much, much worse, right? That is a bad defense in court.
We're going to go to the
Sorry.
next question because I don't think Claire can keep track of
Sorry.
that.
It's a good
Susan,
discussion.
please.
Yeah.
A question for you, Vic. You had mentioned, sort of as an aside, the importance of disclosing biases, sources of funding, relationships with industry, et cetera. That's often used as a way of making such relationships, avoidable, potentially biasing relationships, okay, because the assumption is that it will create skepticism, reasonable skepticism, in how people interpret or perceive
Right.
the research you're presenting. I wonder if you could comment on that, and I just see disclosure as being way too easily used to sort of paper over sometimes.
Sure,
Yeah.
Susan, I in part really agree with you in this answer. I think that disclosure is not the only thing one needs to do. I don't think that disclosure makes things, quote, okay, as you stated. I don't think that's the purpose of disclosure. I think the purpose of disclosure is transparency. And I think Rod very nicely put up all of the different things, the tribal part. You know, one really should disclose, I'm a physician. One should disclose, I work at the University of Michigan Medical Center. There are many elements, and that disclosure would end up being many pages long probably if we were really honest and cognizant of all of our potential biases, so that's difficult to do. So we drop in our financial disclosures. Rod has continued through this hour to talk about money, 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 money. I would say there's so much more than money. I don't think that money is the inherent driver of all evil in this case.
I already conceded that point. In fact, I
But
agree
you've
that
said
the
it.
other...
But you said continued to go back and continue to use money as in most of your examples.
Well, it's not necessarily individual. It's your fiduciary responsibility, which is ethical. It's not your own financial interest. It is the ethical responsibility you've taken on to others' financial interest. That is not your own money. It is your commitment to them. And the other thing is, I skipped the disclosure thing because it's really been studied enough. Disclosure makes things worse. Because what people remember is they disclosed and then they went on, and then people forget about that. Right? And it makes people feel more emboldened. They can be even more biased. They can be even more against the public interest because they disclosed it. And people actually feel morally freed now from that public responsibility because they disclosed it. Disclosure, I think, is bad. Get rid of disproportionate conflicts. And proportionality is important, right? My level of conflict to physicians is really fairly small, right? You know, it's the hazards of the commons, right? I'm just one person. But I don't take positions for the guild. I avoid those positions just as much as I would business. I'm not going to be the head of the ACP. I am not going to be the head of the AMA. I'm not even having a leader position. As a researcher, I should have no leadership positions in guilds. I should treat them just like any other business. I might treat my guilds the same way as I do businesses.
Next question. Marcia, you can ask the question.
Rod, I'm always inspired when I listen to you, but you...
Oh, could you tell my son? He's
But you do outline a very monastic version of researchers. And as I recall, the priesthood at this point, at least in the Catholic Church, has to remain celibate because that way they can truly dedicate themselves to the members of their parish.
I'm not willing to be celibate.
That's an extreme example.
I have a promise to my wife.
And neither are most people prepared to be celibate, because
Including many priests.
they are having a hard time recruiting. Given that, that people probably want to do more good, expand their reach, that the University of Michigan encourages researchers to start ventures. They were encouraging a group of us yesterday. What are the safeguards? The safeguards of the IRB and disclosing probably isn't enough. The safeguards of saying these are the companies I work for is probably not enough. What can we do if we're not going to be priests, but we're going to be good lay people?
Should we have, Vic take over?
Okay.
I'm on the University of Michigan's Conflict of Interest Board at the university level, and so we see lots and lots of new businesses starting up all the time, and I can say we have very detailed, very in-depth discussion of the nature of those conflicts, and I think that is one way to do this. I would really completely disagree that disclosure is bad. I'm in favor of transparency because everybody has biases at so many different levels. One must need to continue to disclose to make things transparent. And part of disclosure is disclosure to the university of various conflicts. And we insist on that as a university. And that's one way to try to keep this as sane as possible. I agree with you. I don't believe that we can have a monastic order. I think that's a pure ivory tower approach that's kind of, to some extent, in my opinion, putting our head in the sand.
That, just to clarify, conflict, I wasn't suggesting disclosure is wrong, but that disclosure is an excuse that it's okay to have large conflicts, and somehow you could manage those, rather than trying to minimize every conflict. That's what's bad. We think it's okay that people have this incredible inherent conflict and then they announce it. We know that's what I think is bad, that it's okay. You were probably right that the nuns beat me into this as a young child. But it's the way I am, and and I think that it's a wonderful life, and that, and I think it's a very valuable one. I think my brother's an entrepreneur. What he does is very valuable too. Business is essential. Business is what we need in places like Zambia. That's really valuable too. And I'm not one of these people that think what I do is better than what everyone else does, but I think the safeguards have to be that we be what we be, and we be that publicly with disclosure, but we don't have side deals. We just don't have side deals.
I think we're assuming that there's this gigantic wide-body bridge that goes between research and science and the real world. And quite honestly, it doesn't exist. The kind of research articles we develop go back to the Royal Society in the 1650s. It doesn't work anymore that well. The average person is writing an article that's read by other people who just refer to their article. It's almost like masturbation. I mean, masturbation is fine as far as I'm concerned. It's just not that productive. How do we become really productive and impactful if we're going to do our research? Consult. You talk as if you're consulting all the time and changing the world through your consulting, but the average academic doesn't have nearly the time to do this kind of consulting.
I just want to say that his comments about masturbation is insensitive to millions of teenage boys.
We're definitely going to the next question.
So I'd like to get both your thoughts. Given that disclosure is not going away, any thoughts on the system that might broaden that to looking at conflicts of commitment which seem to be particularly difficult in a world where we have different revenue streams and projects.
Yeah. Well, I know that in our school, I'm not quite sure how the medical school operates, but we're allowed to work 1 day a week outside, and that's actually encouraged, that we go out and we start seeing the real world as much as possible. When I start up a new company, when I started Health Media, I took a half-time leave of absence for 2 years in order to have the time to be able to do that. I did think I could manage both, and I had a conflict management plan that I insisted I not create, but that the university created. This is early on when a lot of this was being developed. And so I believe there are models, indeed, that can be developed in this area. But I certainly think that there are conflicts of time. I totally agree with Rod that this pulls you. So you need to find out, you need to determine how much are you going to be pulled out of your regular, normal job, and agree to do that. Agree to stop getting paid for that amount of work that you're being pulled out of, if that's how you're going to handle it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I still feel the ethical conflict is very real. It's not all financial, once again, that it's often more the desire to succeed in our own self-image with that, but the conflict. But yes, I do think the idea that given the policy that we have, and the policy we have allows academic researchers to do this, I fully acknowledge. This is my personal opinion. Actually, it's not my personal opinion, it's the opinion that you gave me. But very seriously, I think many people do not take seriously enough both the time, but also the intellectual energy. I can tell you now the amount of hard intellectual work I can do now is very different than it was 30 years ago. I feel very bad about that. If I'm doing something really intense, 6 hours is a lot in 10 hours. And that's been shown very well in the psychology literature. We have limited amounts of time that we can use for that creative aspect, for those innovations. I also agree with Vic, many researchers do research that isn't relevant, but that's not true of everyone. And that's part of the dedication to the public rather than themselves. And that you can do academic research that impacts millions and hundreds of millions of lives.
You can, but it's difficult. Can I just say one real quick thing? You've used this metaphor twice about energy, and that it's almost like a teacup, and it's filled with tea, and then it gradually goes away. I don't believe that at all. I actually think that through my experiences and others that I've seen, when you are consulting, when you're in the real world, when you're building a new business venture, gives you more energy than ever, more energy, more vitality to be able to conduct interesting research. You're actually moved every day to start thinking more about research and more about your teaching.
I think you're confusing motivation with intellectual energy. The intellectual energy.
You are each now going to get a closing statement. So first of all, before that, the reason we do these point counterpoints every year, and Rod does one of them, is because it gives me the power to actually give Rod an opinion, which I would not otherwise ever have. So I do want to thank both Rod and Vic. This has been amazing. They are going to get a closing statement. Afterwards, I hope you join us all. IHPI has sponsored a brunch for us, so please continue the conversation afterwards. But before we do that, let's see, who did we start with originally?
We started with Vic.
We started with Vic, so we'll start with you on the closing statement.
Okay, so now I'm me. I think all of the dangers and things that I've talked about, I feel are very, very real. I'm not one to tell other people what they should and shouldn't do. It's just not. I often exhort for these sort of dedications. The dedication to the public is very real. The dangers of all our other vested interests. And I agree completely. The financial is not the biggest one. It is those personal relationships. It's those people that I had to force myself to write the paper as I would because it was going to really hurt their drug. And these were good people and a good business, right? Those emotional ties are big. And what it does is it makes us less likely to change our view. And we really do need to work to not be invested in anything other than that truth and all. That might sound hokey, but I don't think it is. And I do agree. Researchers violate it every day. Research is not in good shape on this issue now. I look out at the research community and I see more people in it for themselves than others, and us thinking that's okay. Yes, it's going to happen. People are frail. You know, the good man sins 7 times a day, right? That's not a license to say, well, if it's 7, what's the problem with 40? Okay? So these are important issues for each individual to think about. And don't think if you do something different than I say that I'm going to think about it at all, because yeah, I'm a good Catholic. I think of how bad I am every day. And that's what I'm really obsessed with. It's not living up to my own goals. So don't worry at all about any judgment there. I take a lot of comfort in judge not, lest thee be judged, because, yeah. Anyway, and also I have problems staying on topic. So thank you all for showing.
First of all, it's been a true pleasure interacting with you. I've had a wonderful time, really, and it really is nice to interact with a person who does have tremendous integrity, and I've always respected for a couple of decades now. So thank you for agreeing to do this, and thank you for inviting me. I think for me, I didn't get into academia other than to try to make an impact. I wasn't interested in, you know, certainly, God knows, outside of the medical school, my starting salary was $18,000 a year. It wasn't that much. I never expected to make much money in this field. I never had particular interest in making more money in the field. That was not my motivator. But I was extraordinarily frustrated at my inability to make impact. And when I started a new business, when I started working with other companies that had a very significant impact, I started feeling better about myself. I felt like I was actually becoming more well, and I was feeling like on my headstone I could leave a legacy of having reached over 50 million people and hopefully changed millions of people's lives. And that's my intention, my goal in this field. If I can manage my own conflicts, so, you know, then I can. If I can't, I can't. Everybody has conflicts, would be my argument, and one has to manage those primarily as one human being, as yourself. This is all about your own virtue and your own character and the degree to which you can manage your own virtue and character while you are trying to make an impact in the world.
And just one thing, I wanted to thank Vic at all for being such a good sport. And Vic and I have known each other for 20 years, and just so you know, we respect each other, and it's great. And we look for many, many additional years
of masturbation.
And the masturbation comment was too far. That was too far.